How to make a career as an art curator. Giorgia von Albertini found her way. Amongst others, she worked with a Swiss artist, not Vital. And meanwhile, she curated several shows around the world, including Brazil, the US, Chile, England, and Switzerland. Now she's just launching a new publication on Mexican artist Martin Soto Clement. Welcome to Swizz Art Biz. I'm Tanya König, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Giorgia today in the studio. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's great having you. It's been a while that we've been talking to do this.
Yeah.
But you've been busy, amongst other, by working on this publication.
Yeah, so this is my newest publication. It's a survey publication on Martin Soto Clement's work. Martin is a Mexican contemporary artist. It's his first kind of scholarly publication, so I've contributed a lot of text myself, but also invited other writers to write about his work. So it's really a kind of thorough and in-depth publication on his work that took a lot of time to make, but it's finally here, so I'm very happy about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So you're launching it in Zurich on the 8th of February?
Exactly. So we are doing various book launches. We started in Mexico, Martin's home city, and are launching in Zurich on the 8th of February at Karma International, the gallery. And concomitantly, we're also staging an exhibition with kind of Martin's newest works. Yeah.
Great. So we'll talk about that collaboration a bit later on, because I would like to go back to the beginnings of how you started your career. Mm-hmm. You studied political science and art history at the University of Zurich from 2011 to 2014. Was it always clear to you that you wanted to become an art curator?
I think it wasn't perhaps always clear to me that I wanted to become a curator, but the arts in general have always been very fascinating to me and have always unleashed a kind of positive feeling about society and humanity and like human production in a way. So it was always something that was very fascinating to me, but I also early on understood that I'm not an artist myself. I was very interested in art history and perhaps also history at large. I studied politics, which was a great kind of way to acquire very solid general knowledge about the world we live in. And while studying art history and while graduating in Zurich, I think my interest solidified, and it became clear to me that I love to write about art, that I love to work and be with artists. So kind of that career path gradually took shape, I would say.
So there was not really a key moment, or was there?
I think there might have been several key moments, be that exhibitions that really made a lasting impact on me, or professors or texts or people I worked with. So I think there was maybe a chain of key moments that solidified this path, yeah.
Yeah, in 2017, I asked you for another interview what opening doors means to you. Mm-hmm. And you gave me a really beautiful answer about how other people also helped you basically enter their world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've had a few key figures in the years, like during my studies and after my studies. So one of them was Bice Curiger, who is, of course, one of the greatest European curators and writers. So she invited me to kind of build her archive. And in doing so, I studied her whole trajectory as a curator and her whole exhibition history and her texts. So it was a kind of second studies in a way. So I was really able to deepen my knowledge in art history, but also to kind of witness firsthand what it means to be working as a curator. So I saw what methodologies she applied. I saw how she built relationships with specific artists over a longer period of years. So you might know that Bice had two artists in specific that she worked with very closely and over many years. They're Meret Oppenheim and Sigmar Polke. So Bice certainly was a very important figure for me because I learned a lot from her and I learned a lot in the process of building her archive. And then another important figure for me was, and still is, Not Vital, with whom I've worked for nearly 6 years. So I was Not's a studio manager and I was a curator at his foundation. And Not is quite a special artist in the sense that his practice is really global. Mm-hmm. So he has studios in various countries, not only in Switzerland, but also in Brazil and in China, in Beijing. He produces his works in a multitude of places. And he also realizes projects all over the world. So with him, I kind of stepped into a very international and global scene of contemporary art. And I also really learned about aspects that were before perhaps less known to me, which are aspects of production. So I was really involved. So Not, as you know, some of Not's sculptures are very big. Some are made in marble. Others are realized in bronze. So he uses a variety of materials, and he always travels to the countries and places where there is most knowledge about that material to then produce with specialists. So I learned a lot about the making of art, and in a way this very specific knowledge then also informed my scholarly approach to writing about specifically Not's work, but also other artists' work. So as a art historian who kind of analyzes the practice, I always try to keep an eye on how the work is made and in what kind of socio-political conditions that takes place, and how that then in turn informs the finite art object. Yeah.
And you were able to work with, let's say, Bice and Not Vital right after your bachelor, or very soon, right? So I wonder, were there times that you also were scared because they're already so established within the art world and you were at the beginning of your career?
I think I wasn't really scared, luckily, but I had a lot of respect. Yeah. So, and I think that respect it's also really important as a young person to kind of respect older generations, but also to not be scared of one's own kind of worldview, which might necessarily differ from another generation's worldview. So I had and still have a lot of respect for them, and they taught me so much. And I was quite lucky, actually, to start working with them at such a young age. Bice, for example, I simply wrote her a letter saying how much I admire her work and if there would be any way to collaborate with her. So I kind of dared to take initiative and got lucky.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's actually the great.
It's a very unconventional way of finding a job. Perhaps.
So you just thought, I would love to work with her.
Because she was, her way of writing and her way of doing shows is really unique and really amazing. And she has this way of, art can at times be elitist, right? And I think she has this quite unique capacity of doing really high-level intellectual exhibitions, but still rendering them appealing and accessible to a general public. So there is always an element of humor there. So there are kind of various levels through which one can connect. And I thought that was very important in terms of cultural production and very appealing.
And she wrote back immediately, or how did that work then?
Then we met, and slowly through discussions, she spoke a lot about her archive and that kind of being a project that she had been wanting to tackle but never had the time to. And so gradually we agreed that I'd be taking care of that. And actually, this weekend at the Engadine Art Talks, she will launch a publication called C is for Curator, which is a publication that Dora Imhoff made about her life's work. So part of my base work around her archive is now also contained in a publication. Yeah, so that's really nice.
So a lot of current projects kind of popping up all the time. That's interesting just to hear also, because I think many people sometimes just don't dare to do stuff, and sometimes you can just ask.
Worst case, you
get a no.
Hear a no, and then you move on and do something else. Yeah.
And then after that, 3 years after your bachelor, you did your master in curatorial studies in New York. So I was just wondering what happened between the bachelor and master, but I think that was what you just
Yeah,
told.
I was working with Bice, I was working with Nod, I was also doing exhibitions in South America. It all started with an exhibition in Chile, and then I met various artists that I then also showed at the Biennale de Bolivia in La Paz, and so forth. So I somehow, through various South America trips, I got involved in these different art scenes, specifically in Chile, Bolivia, and Peru, and staged various exhibitions there, which was really great for me because it was the art scenes there are very different, of course, from what we know in Switzerland or in Zurich, right? I mean, these are countries where there is no or very little government funding for the arts. So young artists have to be, in a way, much more inventive. And they also really have a scene or a community that is perhaps a little different or stronger than what we are used to in countries like Switzerland. So it was really formative and very nice for me. Yeah. So I always tended to do a mix of things as much as that was possible. So whenever I had holidays or whenever I accumulated enough overtime, I would go to South America to do a project there. And so it really enriched my way of thinking about art and also of kind of understanding and acknowledging that art history is not just about the art of the West, right? Yeah, which is something that is more and more acknowledged from a wider population that some people still don't take for granted.
And you also said that there somehow it might be a bit more difficult for an artist because there's less funding. Was it something that kind of also inspired you, because now you're also working as an independent curator? From the outside, people might also think, wow, you also have to take risk to do that because you're not employed by a museum or anything like that. Do you think that your travels somehow inspired you to be so fearless and bold? Yeah. Or you don't even think about it? I feel so natural somehow.
I mean, I'm not sure if it's connected to the travels or if it's just an unconscious decision or one just takes I don't know, some people are more risk averse and others are less risk averse. But yeah, it's definitely not easy, right? The art industry or art world is a very special industry that differs a lot from other industries, and there is a lot of money changing hands in the art market, right? But the group of people or the workers that are really kind of underpaid and undervalued is the intellectual labor, right? And a lot of my work is intellectual labor. So if we speak about books or exhibitions, it's certainly not the most well-paid job in the industry, but somehow inventiveness and the fact that I've always done a variety of things helped me to find an equilibrium and to make it work.
How long have you been independent now?
And I mean, I've been independent for 2-3 years, and I had Nod as my biggest client for a while, and now that phased out and I have more and more new clients. So it was a very organic and natural transition. Yeah.
And how do you decide which projects you take on? It feels like if we're looking at this book, you told me prior that you actually started 10 years ago.
I met Martin 10 years ago, actually in Zurich, because he started to work with Karma International, the gallery headed by Marina Olsen and Karolina Dankov in 2009. So that was his first show. And I met him shortly thereafter through Marina, who is a common friend. And we were friends. We spoke a lot about art. I got to know his practice. And then with the years, I started to write about his work. And I wrote about his work also on the occasion of various exhibitions. I wrote my thesis at the Center for Curatorial Studies in New York about his practice, and we staged an exhibition in New York. And in a way, this book is like the culmination of many years of friendship and research. So it's hard for people ask me, how long did it take you to write this book? And it's a hard question for me to answer, because there was a lot of kind of unconscious preparatory work going on, and it's based on, if you will, years of research.
So it's kind of, you meet someone, you might like the work, you do some stuff, and maybe it ends up in a publication or in a show, or...
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. Sometimes I'm approached by an institution or a gallery who asks me to propose an exhibition. And these exhibitions, when approached by an institution or gallery, are often group shows or kind of thematic exhibitions.
Which you did for Hauser and Wirth.
For example, exactly. And sometimes it's also artists who approach me. Let's say they have an exhibition scheduled somewhere but would like to work with me as a curator, or they have a project they want to realize but have no venue yet to realize it in. So I also mediate in these regards, or provide advisory. And often I am fascinated by practices so much that I like the repeated engagement with the artist. So I feel it's really beneficial for research to kind of have the opportunity to not just do one show or write one essay about the artist, but if possible to kind of have this repeated engagement, because I think it really deepens your knowledge of the practice, and it also deepens your knowledge of how the practice evolves, right? Like no artist's career
is linear,
or like nothing stays necessarily the same, right? Artists evolve, and their topics evolve, their means of making evolve. So I find it really interesting to trace these trajectories and to kind of deepen my knowledge of an artist's practice.
It was interesting what you said about that intellectual work within the art world is the one that is maybe least paid, just because this is also Swizz Art Biz, about business and career. I'm just thinking also, when you work with an artist, or it just happens that you somehow collaborate, and then it might end up in something else, then there's a lot of unpaid work as well. I mean, I guess there's also things that you just do because you like doing, or...
I mean, I don't work for free. So I've been very tough on that one from very early on, because some people do somehow work for free, either because they need to kind of advance their career or for other reasons. But I always found that in a capitalist economy, no one should work for free. And I always thought it was important to assert the value of my work. So I really stick to that. But of course, especially being independent or having your own office or practice, there are moments where you need to basically invest in your own career, right? So you take a risk, you begin a collaboration, and it's perhaps unsure where that might take you, but you push for it and you believe in it, and then you take it to the next level. So that certainly happens,
Okay. What does a typical day look like in your life? Probably there is no typical day. I can imagine.
I actually love it. That I love the change, and I love this kind of multitude of things that's happening. I mean, now, of course, with the pandemic, I had a little more routine than I usually do. So for many years, I've been traveling quite a lot. And somehow it felt luxurious to me to have more time at home. This book is also a baby of the pandemic in a way. So I did most of the work during COVID on it. A typical day certainly entails some kind of work on my desk at a computer. So that's part of it. It might entail research or traveling, phone calls. It really depends. So if I'm installing a show, I'm really focusing on that and try to cut out as much of other things as possible to really focus on install. If I'm writing, I also try to kind of block longer periods for that, because it's hard to like write for an hour, run to a meeting and write for another half an hour, because you kind of fall in and out of your subject. But other than that, I love being mobile, and I love meeting very different people and working on different projects.
So you just said that about writing. I mean, I know that myself. Sometimes you just have to focus.
Yeah.
So you need to sometimes immerse yourself in your work.
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes I refuse answering emails for a day or two to just focus on the writing, because I feel like I have to develop this kind of sensibility or this ability to make connections between different aspects of an artist's practice, and to really be analytical about the work. One needs to kind of really be focused on the work, and for that I think time is needed. Yeah. So writing takes time.
Then you also mentioned now the pandemic, that this book is basically a baby of the pandemic. I was wondering, how did these months affect your work and from traveling so much, or is there something that you think you're taking with you from this time?
I mean, it affected my work in various positive and negative ways. So, for example, in terms of logistics or bureaucracy, it was a nightmare, because I had several shows that were postponed twice, and then you have to realize them under very difficult conditions. International projects were quite hard because shipment was difficult, right? Sometimes there weren't enough cargo planes or cargo ships to get the works from A to B. So I think every one of us in the industry, be that museums, galleries, artists, or curators, had to learn to deal with more kind of uncontrollable or unknown factors than before. But I also found it fascinating to realize how, in a way, flexible humans can be. Like, I think we adapted a lot and we learned a lot as well. So that's certainly one part. And the other part, I think, is that it enabled me to slow down. So I had this luxury, as I said before, of being able to be home more and being able to take time to write. And yeah, so there was this kind of twofold nature of the whole thing.
And what about all these digital things that popped up during that time? I mean, now for art fairs, the online viewing rooms, or now also this rise of NFTs, or I mean, it's a lot, but maybe what do you make out of that? Or does it even have an impact on your work?
I mean, I think in a very general way, I think that these last few years, be that in the arts or in other sectors, accelerated a lot of developments that were perhaps already ongoing before, right? So the arts have always been a very archaic or under-digitized industry compared to others. And I think it's good that we catch up a little. So I think the whole development is necessary and natural, considering the world we live in, which doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the real experience, the real life encounter. And I don't think one replaces the other, but I think it's good to have both. And I think once everything returns to normal, that's what we will have, right? To be able to choose how to interact with art or with customers or with audiences. Yeah.
When you go to a museum or a gallery, art fair, what do you look out for?
I mean, it depends. Museums and art fairs are very different for me, because the art fair is also, I mean, if you're with a collector, of course, you look out for specific work for them, but it's also a moment for the industry to gather, right? So you see your colleagues, you see people from another continent or country that you didn't have the occasion to see otherwise in the year. So it's moments for lots of conversations and encounters and updates. And so it's always, art fairs are always very busy and energetic, whereas museums, for me, are a place where I love to be alone. So that when I'm alone, I really have the occasion to take time to look at stuff. So I also often go back to museum or gallery after an opening, because at an opening it's always hard to really devote time to what you're seeing, right? So so the three are very different experiences, but I enjoy them all in their own ways.
So we spoke a bit about your beginnings, your current work, now looking ahead, how much do you plan in advance? I mean, now you have this in February, the book launch, but then beyond that, or is it you don't even think, you just work and it?
It's a bit of both, because some institutions schedule their exhibitions 2 years in advance, 2 years in advance. So you might have some projects that are in the future that you know of and that are scheduled, and then there are always kind of more spontaneous things that happen in between. So it's a mix of both, which I like in a way. So it's always good to have a few fixed points along the way, right? But then I also try to stay open for other things happening.
How many projects do you have at the same time? Can you even say?
It's hard to say, but I would say around maybe 6 different projects at the same time. So you have some writing, you have a show, maybe you advise an artist on another matter, or there are always different things going on at once. Yeah.
And are you thinking about like having a team that works for you as well?
So right now I have project-based collaborators. So for this book, I worked with a very nice colleague of mine who's based in New York. For other things, I work with other people that are specific to the project. But yeah, I think it would be nice to have support or to have a collaborator, yes, when time is right.
Right. And now thinking about someone that somehow wants to maybe go the path that you did, or become an art curator, is there an advice that you could give them, or maybe was there an advice someone gave to you? Did people encourage you on your way?
There was encouragement, but there was also a lot of discouragement, because it's obviously not an easy job to have. It's perhaps more stable if you work in an institution, but it's generally a job that few people succeed in, or that few people are able to sustain themselves with. So that's why perhaps some people or paternal figures might discourage it. But
so they were afraid that you might not make it, or what people say, like, or you're crazy, or
yeah, or people try to advise you to go for something more stable or more solid or whatever. But in the end, it didn't matter much to me, and I kind of did my thing, and I'm very happy about it. I don't regret it at all. I think, I'm not sure about specific advice, but I think it's always important to kind of understand what one really wants, and to also believe in this trajectory and put in the work hard. I think, I mean, I work hard, and I think it's also what enabled me to do the things I do. I think it's really, the crux is kind of to find something that you love, and love enough to work really hard for
to
it.
also sacrifice then.
Yeah, but also when you love your work, you do it with pleasure. So I think I'm very privileged or lucky to have found something that I really care about, and that gives me a lot of energy to kind of pursue it. Yeah.
So you don't think about retiring?
No, I'm quite young still.
No, I know. No. I'm just saying that because I have people in my age, well, we are more or less the same age, I think, who tell me, once I'm retired, and I always think, I never think about that. I think I'm going to work until I die.
Yeah.
So,
but it's perhaps because for you also your work or your practice is part of your identity, right? And as soon as you identify with what you're doing, it becomes part of yourself, and you don't even want to dissociate from it. But it's funny that what you speak about retirement, because my little brother, when he was still a kid and people would ask him, like, what do you want to become one day? He would say retired.
Really?
Because he saw our grandfather and he thought, oh, it's such a nice life. I just want to be retired.
That's amazing. But so I can imagine that for you, probably you also think probably you're going to work until you can work.
Yeah. And I mean, the job, like I'm doing it now, this like multitude of projects, normally lots of traveling and kind of constant flexibility, is of course something that takes a lot of energy and that is easier possible while you're still young or don't have a family and so forth. So I don't know if I will keep on working until I'm 80 in the same way that I work now, but I definitely will keep on working in some way. I think it's also nice to find ways through which your practice can adapt to different times or different moments in your life. So I'm curious to see what will happen.
Great. We're curious as well to see what you have for us. So besides this launch, what else can you announce? Is there anything else that you can announce?
So in conjunction to the launch, we'll have an exhibition at Karma. The main focus of the exhibition will be how, or maybe I have to elaborate a bit on Martin's work in order to make it more understandable. So Martin's practice began in a very performative way and in a way that is very much tied to objects. So he had very limited means and he started to collect objects on the streets and in his surroundings and to combine and manipulate them in performative manner. And something that's really fascinating about his work is that all of his transformations, or nearly all of them, are reversible. So there is kind of an economy embedded in that, right? It's like about not producing something new, but taking pre-existing things and to create a new situation, if you will, with them, but one that is reversible. So everything is ephemeral. So if you see on the cover, there is this work that consists of two jewelry boxes kind of biting into each other. It's called El amor es canibalismo sin dientes, which means love is cannibalism without teeth. So it's a very kind of emblematic work for him, right? It's kind of sensual or erotic, but it's also humorous. It's very simple, but it's also effective. So departing from this object-based work, Martin wanted to somehow approach painting. But he's not necessarily a painter, right? He works with objects and he likes the ephemeral and the poetic and the humorous. So he started to place women's tights, kind of fetish material, right? And the material that very much alludes to the body. So he placed women's tights on canvas. So it's like legs extending over the canvas. So he found a very iconic way to kind of hint towards the female body and hint towards the whole history of the female nude in painting, but without really depicting it, only by alluding to it and without making a permanent mark on the canvas. So the exhibition takes this very iconic group of works of his as a point of departure, because departing from these works with tights on canvas, he then started much later in his career to experiment with tights as stencils. So he took tights, he kind of stretched them over the canvas and then work with a mixture of charcoal pigment and egg tempera to kind of imprint the memory of the tight onto canvas. So he pulls the tight, he puts the pigment, he takes the tight away and the kind of trace of the tight remains. And it's a technique that kind of alludes to the avant-garde technique of the photogram. So he calls them photogram. So the exhibition will kind of trace this trajectory from these iconic works with tights on canvas to some photograms that he did, and then to these very new pigment-based works, which is kind of the closest he ever came to painting without actually painting. Yeah. So,
great. Yeah. So we can see that starting February the 8th at Karma in Zurich. Will there be anywhere else if someone is not in Zurich? Anywhere else?
So before that, on the 3rd of February, we are launching the book in Rome with a gallery called T293. So we'll be in Rome for that, and then we'll launch it in Zurich and have the exhibition in Zurich. And then on the 18th, Martin has his next exhibition with Union Pacific in London. And then after that, we also launched the book in Paris with Andrei Shevchenko. So we do a little tour in Europe.
Amazing. So if you're interested in Martin Soto Climent's work, there are a few places you can visit, and we'll be following you as well, your work. If you're interested more what Giorgia von Albertini does, you can also follow her on Instagram. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was
Giorgia.
a pleasure.
And all the best
to you as well.
Thank you. And of course, you can listen to this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or you can watch the video on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe, and see you next time.